Hello, and welcome back to part 21. We've had 21 days of ghouls and demons and poltergeists and the gray, everything else you can imagine. And today is part 2 of where I left off from yesterday. And it begins like this. Well, that didn't work well, he thought as he listened to her scream and cry and watched her energy light, or whatever it's called, swish back and forth across the graveyard grounds. Earlier, after they had taken a seat on the bench at the grave's plot, he turned to her again and asked, "Now, what's the last thing you remember before you died?" Bad mistake. He should have chosen his words better. He didn't think about her actually not realizing she was dead. Her energy went everywhere, zipping across the open areas, then through the trees. It came close to him at times and then went far away as possible. He followed her the best he could, then focused in when she came to a sudden stop somewhere near the old section of the cemetery. She didn't move for a few minutes. When he began heading that way to investigate, he stopped when he felt a calmness in the air. He watched as the light began moving backwards in a way, slowly at first and then with more speed. It made a direct line straight to where she had been, where he had found her earlier, and then disappeared next to her grave. She went to sleep, maybe? He walked over to where he last saw the light. By now the trucks had left and the grave sat there alone, covered with hundreds of flowers from one end to the other. There was no tombstone, of course. That usually takes a couple of weeks. Stopping close to it, he read over the cards and discovered her name was Darcy. By the looks at the letters and the handwriting, most of them were from school friends, maybe. He found another card with the years of her life printed on it and realized it hadn't been that long since she turned 11. What happened? Car wreck? Something tragic? He couldn't see her acting as radical as she had earlier if she had had a long-term illness or something. So it had to have been something sudden. A car wreck is what took Nicholas Anderson's life too. He remembered the boy's mother saying it in one of her rants not too long ago. But for some reason he didn't stay here. He went on to where he was supposed to go, he guessed. It was amazing how many children die at a young age, more than one might expect. Even with today's advanced technologies and medical advances, tragedy can still strike without a moment's notice. No matter how much one might protect against it, death cannot be prevented. That's why he wished he had lived his life more fuller when he was alive. Just another one of those things, though, that no one will ever believe or accept or even understand until after death, he supposed. Since there was nothing he could do for her now, he went back to the grave's bench and sat down to think about how best to handle the situation when it came time for her to wake up. He didn't remember running out of energy, or even what time of the day it was when it happened, but when he awoke next to his grave, it was well into the middle of the night. The sounds of the nightlife in the cemetery was in full swing, and the trees were making a rustling sound from the light breeze. The moon was high overhead, casting a pale yellow light across the grounds. Wondering where Darcy was, he made his way over to her grave. Eventually, the energy around her appeared in the dark, and he found her sitting on top of all the flowers and the cards they had left for her. Not wanting to impose in her time of thinking or coming to understanding of whatever it was she was doing, he just stopped and waited. After a few minutes, he thought about going back to the bench, but didn't when he noticed that she looked up at him. "What is your name?" she asked, not moving from the piles of flowers and letters. "Jacob. Jacob Daniels. But you can call me Jake. Everyone else did." She looked back down and watched her hand disappear through the flowers as she moved it back and forth. "I can go through things." She moved it back and forth a few more times before looking back to him. "I went down there, you know. I woke up down there, actually." "Down where?" Jake had an idea what she was referring to, but decided to let her tell him instead. His track record for saying something right wasn't exactly that great. "Down to where I'm laying down, sleeping. I couldn't see in the dark well, but I could tell it was me." Her words trailed off, along with her gaze in the distance. "Sleeping forever, I guess?" It sounded like a question, so he moved a little closer to hear her better. When he reached the edge of her grave, she asked, "Why am I here? Is this a place between heaven and hell?" I don't know, really. I've questioned that many times." She turned to him and stood up on top of her grave, then looked around again. "What do you do here all day? How long have you been here?" He looked around as well. "I just bide my time, I suppose." He tried to think of something she might be interested in. "I watch the animals. They're everywhere. We have 6 raccoons that I know of, and about 20 or so squirrels, several armadillos and rabbits that come through every dawn and evening." He looked towards the grove in the distance. "There's a group of deer who come out from that direction quite a bit, especially in the fall. They come through the cemetery on the way down to the pastures just below us. Oh, there's thousands of birds too. I love watching the birds." She moved next to him, following his gaze. "How long have you been here, Mr. Jake?" "I'm not sure." He didn't bother correcting her. Seemed trivial at the moment. 8 or 9 seasons, I think. Those things seemed to kind of lose their importance after a while. He remembered a grave that had received its marker a few days ago and began heading towards it. "I can give you an exact amount of years, though, if you like." He still couldn't figure out how you couldn't remember something so simple. She followed him until he reached the marker. It said 2019. 10 years, he said. He wasn't sure why he couldn't remember, though. That was so simple. 10 years, she said. "Yes, my marker says 2009, so it's been 10 years. "And you haven't talked to anyone in 10 years, ever?" He wanted to laugh. He thought that was funny, not really, not really having a thought about it. Just kind of seemed funny to him. Almost as funny as having graves for a last name or a cemetery only coming to life during death or when remembering the dead. "No, I haven't. I listen to others talk when they come out here and visit graves. But as for actually an actual conversation, like you and I are having at the moment, I haven't." "Are you happy now?" she asked. "Happy?" He looked down at her. "Yes, happy I'm here. Happy to have someone to talk to now." "Well, I suppose." He didn't want to admit he didn't want to admit much more than that, given the circumstances all, but he had to admit it was a nice feeling to finally have a conversation with someone after all these years. But he didn't expect it this way, and didn't wish it this way. "Maybe that's why I'm here." Even in the dark, it seemed as if her eyes lit up. Even the green aura surrounding her brightened a little. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Maybe I'm here to keep you company for a little while. Company until we go to wherever we need to go." He thought about it for a moment, trying to figure out how to reply to her conclusion. It would seem a shame to take away her excitement, but truth be known, he didn't have an answer to give her on it. So why not? With a nod, he smiled back down at her, realizing he had actually manifested himself into something similar to a body when he noticed his hand as he put it on her shoulder. It appeared to be the body he once had. Interesting. He hadn't even realized he could manifest in a way he could see himself. "Maybe that's exactly it," he said, trying to sound excited. It almost felt like a lie, but in another way it didn't. Maybe there was a reason for her being here, and him as well, and they just hadn't discovered it yet. She smiled and returned his earlier question back to him. "So what do you remember? What's the last thing you remembered before you died?" Laughing, he replied, "Well, that's a long story." She turned, and they looked out across the cemetery. In the distance, at the bottom of the valley, near the pastures, it appeared the sun was just about to begin rising. The entire skyline was turning a dark red glow, and he could just make out the outline of the cattle grazing in the fields. She said, "I think we're going to have plenty of time to share long stories, Mr. Jake." That response caused him to laugh even louder. "I believe you might be right, Darcy. I believe you might be right." Together they began walking down one of the many paths, and he pointed towards a bench facing the east at the edge of the cemetery. "There's my favorite place to watch the sunrise. You can see everything from there." "I can't wait to see it," she said, reaching up to take his hand as they made their way to the bench. And that's all I got. That was the end of it. Will it continue later or not? I don't know, but right now I'm keeping it as a short story. And we'll just see what happens. Hopefully tomorrow, part 21, I'll have something else. And we'll just keep going 10 more days. Halloween will be here. Hope you have a good night.